Good afternoon and welcome to today's World Water Awareness Month Learn Live session entitled How Codes Need to Change to Promote Water Reuse. Your instructor or your speaker for today is Lisa Rild, and she will introduce herself here shortly. In the meantime, a few housekeeping notes. If you lose connection, please feel free to click on the link to rejoin the session. CEUs will be marked complete upon completion of this webinar today, and you will receive an email indicating that you have completed the training. If you have any questions, I will put my email in the chat, but for now, I'll hand it over. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you might be located. As Liz said, I'm Lisa Rild. I am an ICC staff member. I work in the PMG, Plumbing, Mechanical, and Fuel Gas group at ICC. So we deal with primarily the plumbing, mechanical, fuel gas, swimming pool, and sewage disposal codes there. So we will get started here, and I will just let you know, as Liz said, it's great if you're muted when you're not speaking, but if you have a question, unmute yourself and speak up, and we'll try to get questions addressed as we go along. And this is, I'm hoping to have audience participation on this one because this is kind of a brainstorming, talk about what we have and where we're going, and what we can do to advocate for water reuse within the code. So I'm want everybody out there to be able to participate and add their 2 cents worth as we go along. So please don't feel free to do that by either asking a question or typing a question in the chat. I will try to keep track of the chat and if there's anything that comes up there. All right. So I'm assuming everybody can hear me. Liz was able to hear me earlier, so hope that means everybody else can as well. So with that, we will go ahead and get started here. All right, this is me. As I said, I am a director of PMG Technical Resources in the PMG group at ICC. My email is shown there on the page, so you can get a hold of me if you want to contact me for any reason. I'll also put it in the chat a little bit later if you have any questions about that. So this is me. If you might type in the chat who you work for, what kind of role you have, where you're located, get some idea of where everybody's from that's on the call today. So how about adding some where you're from and what you do in the chat messages there. Few messages started to come in there. Building official in Corpus Christi. Nice to meet you, Bill. Master plumber. All right. Who else is on the call? Where are you calling from? What job roles do you have? So we understand where everybody's coming from. Ty, building inspector in Santa Cruz, California. Nice to have you, Ty. Earl, from Miami, Florida. Fox STEM in Washington, D.C., design engineer, fire inspector in Santa Fe, New Mexico, building official, Washington State, master plumber, California, civil engineer, recycled water. All right, model codes in Canada. Great to have you on. Code enforcement, North Charleston, South Carolina, on the phone, on the call. Fantastic. All right. I'm sure a few more will come in, but let's go ahead and move on. So The subject today, we're talking about how model codes might need to change to promote water reuse. So, often the first thing we think of when we hear water reuse, I think probably all of us on this call are more professionals, and we understand that um, we've been recycling water for a long time, but this little graphic here is just kind of a interesting little take on it. If we have our choice of all these different bottles of water here, who here on the call is gonna, raise their hand and say, "I'll take the recycled water there on the end." It's it's just kind of a uh, stigma, if you will, when we start talking about recycling water, and it's like, I'm not going to drink recycled water. I might, water my lawn with it or something like that. But I think, going forward, we have to get past some of that and realize that in the end, we've been recycling water for quite some time. It's just about how it's getting recycled, I guess. Um, so this graphic here shows what we all know is the water cycle of, rain falls, waters our plants, goes through the Earth's crust, goes to the oceans, goes to plants, provides moisture all over the place, and eventually evaporates and starts the cycle all over again. Um, but this has been happening for, millions of years. But what's happening currently is this length of the cycle has been expedited, so to speak, so that it's much more difficult um, for the natural process of the water that we're using. We're consuming a lot more water, um, but it's this time frame has been sped up, if you will, as to how much time it takes for it to go through this whole process because we're using water at such a higher rate because of the appliances that we have these days. So this conversation we're going to have today is about, what can we do to kind of think out of the box for some alternative ideas of how we might be reusing water and how we could look at it differently, how our codes need to change, what's already included in our codes as far as water reuse goes, but what needs to change going forward so that we can um, better help the whole ecosystem of this process of recycling the water that's been done naturally for millions of years, but we probably need to do our part now to help with that process. All right, so we've probably all seen newspaper articles, magazine articles online, whatever. We talk about toilet to tap. Toilet to tap doesn't sound very uh, friendly. Um, Sounds downright gross if we want to think about it, but that's the way it's perceived by a lot of people that we're, going directly from the toilet to tap. But obviously, there's a lot of steps in between that we can take in cleaning the water, filtering the water, and making it usable for either non-potable uses or for cleaning it well enough so that it can be used for potable uses. All right. So on this particular slide, these are some graphics that are created by the US EPA, and these talk about, these are updated as of August of last year, so only about 6 months old. They have some information on here showing different water use regulations across the country. So if we look at this first one, this shows us the states that currently have water use regulations and guidelines for agriculture. So you can see there that there's quite a few states that already have those in place for agriculture. Um, a lot of Western states have it. Probably a lot to do with the fact that they get a lot less total rainfall than the eastern part of the country, and it's out of necessity that they do that. But it's an interesting little map to show where water use regulations or guidelines are in place for agriculture. This shows a similar map here in the top center for regulations or guidelines for impoundments. The one on the upper right here shows which states have regulations or guidelines pertaining to landscaping. So this seems to be the most complete map of where we have identified water use regulations and guidelines is in the area of landscaping. Bottom left-hand corner, this is states that have on-site non-potable water reuse regulations and guidelines. So a few less than what we've seen on several of these other maps. And then we have this that shows the states that have potable water reuse regulations and guidelines, which is probably the stickiest subject, if you will, right now, and is demonstrated by this map not having a lot, or as many states, I should say, as the other maps do. And then this final one is the states that have guidelines for reuse of rainwater collected on site. So this just kind of gives you a hodgepodge of where we are, what states are really participating in some water use, and what areas they're participating in. So how many of you live in a state? Which of these do you have in your state as far as agriculture, impoundments, landscaping, non-potable, potable, or rainwater? By some answers in the chat here, where do you fall in this criteria here? All right, California, you have all of them. You're on all those maps. That looks right. All of them. Virginia. Okay, so looks like Virginia is on most of those maps. All right. Florida, looks like they're regulated on all of them. Yep, showing up there. Okay, Washington has all of them. Live on an island, so rainwater for all the needs. A couple years ago, I stayed on the great island of the big island in Hawaii, and I actually stayed at an Airbnb that had a huge rainwater collection tank as part of the Airbnb. So that was a new experience. It was kind of a real life go out and check out this big tank and see how it works. Nerdy kind of moment. All right, Texas has them all. So it looks like most of you are reporting that you are living in states that are covered by all of these different topics for guidelines for reuse regulations or guidelines. So, all right. So today we're going to do, okay, Canada requirements non-potable rain harvest system were introduced in 2020 in the plumbing code. Most provinces in Canada adopted the 2020 NPC. So, okay, sounds like most of the provinces in Canada, which I apologize for not having maps on Canada, just the US, but I guess that's what US EPA puts out. So, all right, and DC has rainwater collection and landscaping. Okay, good, good. All right. All right, so for today, we're going to try to understand what the current model code provisions exist that promote water reuse. We're going to review some proposed changes in process for the next published version of the model codes. We're going to brainstorm some future code changes that would promote water reuse from the perspective of code enforcement, discuss potential objections to water reuse in the mind of AHJ based on the codes that they enforce, and then try to understand or discuss the psychological hurdles of code enforcement and the users, quite frankly, that they have to overcome in order to be accepting of this broad spread idea of water reuse and for what purposes we might use water over again. So. All right, so to talk about some I codes, these are national model codes that have water conservation provisions in them. In particular, the IBC has some, the IRC has some, the IPC has some, the IGCC, International Green Construction Code, has some, and the IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code. So each of these codes has some provisions in them. And what ICC has done is taken the water conservation or water reuse provisions, sometimes it's both, out of each of these 5 codes and consolidated into one document, which is the International Water Conservation Code. The most recent version of this is the 2021. The other 5 codes shown there in the background actually have a 24 version of the code, but this document, the International Water Conservation Code provisions, the latest edition of it is the 21. It has not yet been created for the 24. But how many of you are familiar with the IWCCP and were aware that you can, in your jurisdiction, if you're in a jurisdiction, adopt this as a document to help with the both conservation and reuse of water in your jurisdiction, as this is not new regulations, that it's not anything new out of these codes. It's just pulling all of the water related provisions for water conservation or water reuse out of those codes. All right, we got one here, been in codes 20 years, never heard of that before. Well, it's good that you came today. Now you know. Good to know. So there are some jurisdictions that they're not ready to jump in maybe to all of the energy codes per se, or the green construction code. And that's what's ideal about this IWCCP, is it's just about the water conservation or water reuse. So it's pulled all the significant things out of these 5 different codes and put them into one place. And then if you wanted to enforce water conservation, water reuse type of principles, you can go to this document and adopt it. This is available on the ICC website. You can view it, the basic version of it, for free. You can also, I believe, get a subscription to look at it there if you want to see the details behind why things were put in, or changes that are made, if you want to do searches and that kind of thing. But it's an excellent document, can be adopted in a jurisdiction as a whole, so that you don't have to hunt and look for all those things within those 5 other codes. It's a single document that promotes water conservation and water reuse. So we're going to go through some of what's contained in the IWCCP. So this is basically highlighting the water reuse and water conservation things that have been pulled into this document. So looking at this, the out of the box here, that the first thing we talk about here is the intent of this code, meaning the IWCCP, to provide minimum requirements to conserve water resources for residential and commercial buildings. So that gives us kind of the scope and the intent right up front there. And then the provisions of this document, chapters 3, 5, 6, and 8, do not apply to the following. So it has eliminated single family dwellings, multiple family dwellings, 3 stories or fewer, manufactured houses, mobile homes or modular homes, and then any building projects that do not use water. So you can adopt this code. Of course, you could change or modify that language if in the jurisdiction that you're in, wanted to enforce it in those occupancies. It's just saying that overall the intent when this was put together is not to cover those particular types of occupancies. All right, into so chapter 2 is a lot of definitions, which are just pulled over from all the other codes that are encompassed, the 5 codes that are encompassed in this document. And then chapter 3 is a lot of general requirements, which are kind of overarching general things that cover everything in subsequent chapters. But starting with chapter 4, this chapter is entitled Water Use Efficiency for both commercial and residential. And in this chapter, in this 402.1, we talk about site water use reduction. Turn my, oops. Oops, I need to go back. Went forward too far there. All right, and in that we have both the topics of landscape design and irrigation are covered in that section. And then the following section is building water use reduction is the title of that chapter. First one there being the topic of plumbing fixtures and fittings. So obviously plumbing fixtures and fittings is important. So this is the table that you'll find in there. This comes from the collection of all of the other codes that are included in this particular document. But as you can see here, we have a whole laundry list of all the different types of plumbing fixtures we might have, whether it be water closets, flushometer, or single flush, dual flush. If it's a urinal, public lavatories, whether it's self-closing, residential bathrooms, kitchen faucets, shower heads, all those kinds of things. And in here, this document defines what the maximum volume or flow is for each of those types of fixtures, compiled neatly all here in one place. All right, and then going back here to our list, after plumbing fixtures and fittings, we have appliances is the next section that we cover there. So here on this list, this table, we talk about the appliance water efficiency and the different types of appliances that are covered in these codes. So we have clothes washers, both residential and public ones that you might find in a, I don't know, an apartment or in a, commercial laundromat, that kind of thing. And we see the maximum water factor, 5.4 gallons per cubic foot of drum capacity, or 4 gallons per cubic foot of drum capacity, showing some maximum water usage. And then we also have on this list dishwashers, whether it's a standard size, compact, or a commercial dishwasher, and gives you some outlines there of different maximum water factors and that kind of thing there. So this is the table that's been compiled from those 5 different documents. By answering in the chat here, does it seem that this list is complete and there are no other appliances that might be added to this list? Or can you think of some other appliances that could possibly be placed on this list that would be applicable to listing a maximum water factor or maximum flow, kind of like we did in the fixtures and fittings, and then and also here in the appliance chart? So, what other types of things? Is there anything else, or is this list complete as is? Anyone? Commercial ice makers, thaw cycle, all that would use water. Anybody else? Any ideas? All right. Well, we'll keep this list in the back of our mind of what's here. See water heaters on the list here. All right. So we will go back to this list here. still in this topic here of building water use reduction. Some other topics that are covered in this section of the IWCCP are HVAC systems and equipment. What do we know about HVAC systems and their equipment? Do HVAC systems produce any excess water that we might reuse at some point? I think generally HVAC systems produce some condensate. I see that in the chat. Very good. Yeah. So, could we be doing something with that condensate? And then when we're talking about, you know, data centers, which I understand take a huge amount of HVAC systems, I have to think that because there's a huge amount of HVAC cooling going on, that we're also producing condensate that would generate. I see swamp coolers on the list here. I am familiar with swamp coolers. I lived in Utah for a period of time, so there's a lot of them there. I'm not sure all geographies are familiar with the swamp coolers, but it is an appliance that is used in the HVAC industry in climates where the humidity is less. All right, so we're seeing not with the chemical treatments for hydrostatic heat and cooling, because we wouldn't want to mix those chemicals in with the condensate and have ill effects. But all right, so other topics we have in this water reuse reduction is roofs, commercial food service operations, and then medical and laboratory facilities. And then the next section, 402.3, is special water features. So when we have any kind of special water features outdoors, usually just kind of some kind of attraction, we lose quite a bit of water out of those in the form of evaporation. So this section here would address some of those things for special water features. So here it's actually on this top of this page: ornamental fountains, other water features, and then pools and spas. Pools and spas, depending on the climate and how arid or dry those are, of course, we lose a lot of water out of those. 4024 talks about water consumption measurement, different methods of how you manage it, how you collect the data, all that kind of thing. 4025 addresses water softeners. And different topics there. If you have demand initiated regeneration, the water consumption they have, waste connections, efficiency in the listing. So we want to make sure they're efficient enough in how they're being used. All right, and then section 402 of this document addresses potable and non-potable water use and efficiency. Specifically talks about reverse osmosis water treatment systems and dual water supply plumbing. Get my words out there. Going on to chapter 6 of this document, that chapter is entitled Non-Potable Water Systems, and this is specifically for commercial applications in this document. So here we see the general requirements, which includes water quality, the signage, permits, water connections, components, insect and vermin control, freeze protection, non-potable water storage tanks. So all topics that you have to deal with when you're talking about a non-potable water system in a commercial setting. Same chapter, next section is on-site non-potable reuse systems. So you have the sources, traps, collection pipes, filtration, disinfection and treatment, with a subsection here, which is important to this conversation we're having today, for gray water used for fixture flushing. If you're planning to use gray water and put it back into toilets or urinals, it covers those topics there. And some storage tanks, valves, pumps, control systems. All right. So 603 talks about non-potable rainwater collection and distribution. So this tells us about how we go about this and all the factors that go into this, from the collection surface to keeping the debris out, first flush diverter, roof gutters and downspouts, drainage, collection pipes, filtration, disinfection, storage tanks. So this really pretty thoroughly covers all the topics that we might need to have for the rainwater collection and then the distribution of that. 604 talks about reclaimed water systems and the tests and inspections that have to go along with that kind of system. Chapter 7 is a chapter on subsurface graywater soil absorption systems. This covers both commercial and residential applications. And in this, we talk about the materials, tests, inspections, disinfection, the coloring. Once again, these are all provisions that are pulled from all those 5 other codes and just put into one document. So you're looking just one place to get those. Still in chapter 7, the system design and sizing is covered in this 702 for the sizing, the percolation test, subsurface graywater soil absorption site location. So always important topics to cover there. So as part of the IWCCP, there's also some other standards that are referenced in there in the appendix. And just to point out what some of those standards are, we have the ICC 700, which is the National Green Building Standard. If you're not familiar with that, we have the ASABE ICC 802 Landscape Irrigation Sprinkler and Emitter Standard. The ResNet ICC 850 standard for the calculation and labeling of water use performance of 1 and 2 family dwellings. And then there's also the CSA ICC 805 standard for rainwater harvesting that gives you some identification for how to collect the rainwater, how to use it, how to store it, how to test it, all those kinds of things there. So those are some additional documents that are referenced within the IWCCP and are included in the indexes of those, or portions of them are included, because some of them are not all, entirely water related, but they do have water portions to them. All right. So that's what we have to talk about, kind of the next step of what we're looking going forward. In the next step, we are currently in the process of modifying the 24 version of all those 5 codes that I talked about that were consolidated and pulled the water provisions into the IWCCP. And we are updating to the 27 versions of those. The proposal period has already ended for that, and we're in the middle of the 3-year cycle, having code action hearings, talking about proposals, having public comment, and moving those things forward. But what I wanted to bring to your attention is that the ICC and the National Blue Ribbon Commission for On-Site Non-Potable Water Systems, which is abbreviated NBRC, they established a water reuse working group prior to the deadline for submitting proposals, which was actually about a year ago when that deadline hit. But they worked for the year or so before that time and got together, and they explored what were some other opportunities to protect the public health, but yet also doing a better job at advancing water reuse within the codes. So really brainstormed about some great ideas that could be used there. So they tried to research as many aspects as possible of on-site water reuse, whether it's for potable use or non-potable use. And the codes we have to date, so to date I'm talking about, say up to the 24 version of the codes, everything that's in there has been primarily used. It's been limited to the flushing of toilets or using reclaimed water in irrigation systems, and that's kind of been the extent of it. So this group hoped to, going forward, they would create some additional opportunities to use more types of water and use it in different ways that we haven't been prescribing in the code in the past. So that was really the objective of this group in what they were doing in trying to make some proposals to improve all of this. So they, through this working group, made some recommended updates to the 27 IPC, and I show you the proposal number there, the P15724, and for the IPC, it's called Part 1. And for the 2027 IRC, the residential code, it's the same proposal number, but it's called Part 2 because it's the plumbing provisions of the residential code that these provisions will be or attempt to modify in their proposal. So these are in hopes that a jurisdiction can help meet their water reuse goals when we look at a risk-based water quality requirements and different applications there. So just, I don't know if any of you are familiar with these two documents that went in as proposals, but the first proposal there, the Part 1, put in for the IPC changes, that proposal is actually 15 pages in length. And the other proposal for the residential code, I believe, is actually 28 pages in length. So we won't go through every single detail of these proposals, but these are going through the proposal process in hopes that they will become a reality and become part of the 27 version of both the IPC and the IRC. And so I'm going to give you some insight to this and what these two proposals intend to change going forward in the 27 IPC and the IRC. All right. So there's some definitions that are being added because in the codes we try to put definitions in. There might be terms in the code that are common terms everybody should know, but it's best to put a definition in so that we're all on the same page when it comes to a definition. For example, in the plumbing code, we might talk about hot water, and you know, we all have our own definition of what hot water is, right? Well, it's important for that reason to put into the definitions in each of the code books. What do you mean by hot water? At what temperature? What can I measure to know that? So sometimes there's things that we, believe we know the definition of throughout the code. If you see anything that's italicized, you will, that is a term that has been defined in chapter 2, and you can refer back to that. So even though you might believe you know the common definition, it's always good to check to make sure you're on the same page as what the code has intended with something like that. So these terms here are putting the terms into the code so they become more common, be more their water reuse terms. And important to the conversation there. So they're being added. As you can see here, black water is being added. It's wastewater that contains urine or fecal matter. This term black water contribution, which is abbreviated BWC, fraction equal to the quantity of black water divided by the sum of the quantities of raw and treated black water plus surface water, groundwater, and water from approved potable water systems. So kind of defines an equation there because it talks about a fraction and some different quantities, but it spells it out for you. Log reduction value, measure of the ability of a treatment process to provide or remove inactive microorganisms such as bacteria, protozoa, viruses. LRV is a logarithm base 10. Oh boy, we're getting into some math here. Of the ratio of the levels of a pathogenic organism or other contaminant before or after treatment. So typically it's not a straight line that we are able to treat things with, or it's more of a log-based functionality. But these definitions are being added, or proposed to being added in both the IPC and the IRC as terms that would be commonly used in the process of reusing water. Additional ones here, we have potable reuse. So obviously you're going to use it for potable applications afterwards. Reuse water, wastewater, or rainwater treated to a level of quality suitable for reuse. Wastewater generated after the use of fresh water, raw water, drinking water, saline water in a deliberate application or process. And then a water reuse system, a system for the treatment, storage, distribution, reuse of water, including but not limited to wastewater and captured rainwater. So those terms on this slide and the previous slide are proposed to be added to both the IPC and the IRC. Obviously, the more terms we have in those codes that are made in reference to water reuse, the more terms we have, the more it's being talked about, the more likely we're seeing it in front of us every day, and it's coming to the forefront as a priority. All right, so we're going to show here some sections of existing code that are being changed or proposed to being changed. And this, as you can see at the top right there, this is part 1. Remember, part 1 is for the IPC and the changes that are happening there. And these changes are particularly identified for Chapter 13, which is currently known as non-potable water systems, but it's proposed that instead of calling that, we're going to call it water reuse systems. So here you can see the underlined in lighter blue is what's being added. The darker blue and struck through is what's being taken out. So you can see really, treatment was already in this paragraph, but they're really moving treatment to the forefront of this whole line of items here of how we're dealing with it. So it's becoming a priority in that sense. We already had reference to the provisions of the CSAB 805, ICC 805 standard. When you're looking at the materials, design, construction, installation of any systems for water reuse. There's a new line added here: application of water reuse systems shall comply with all applicable laws, rules, and ordinances of the jurisdiction. So once again, it's saying you have to refer back to the jurisdiction. Really replacing the last line of the sentence there. All right, we have question here: is reuse going to be defined as not to potable level? Well, I'm going to show you some charts in a minute that are being proposed to be put in to the plumbing codes, and they talk about different levels of treatment and how the water will be reused as to whether it will be used in a potable or non-potable situation. So if you can hang tight, I can show you part of this proposal that is looking to go into the 27, and you can kind of get a snapshot of what's happening there. All right, this is another section where this used to just be water quality. We're now calling it reuse water quality. Once again, these are proposed changes going into this. Have replaced non-potable with reuse water. And then if you'll note here oops, went too far. This new line has been added here as specified in tables 1301.2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. These are 3 brand new tables going into this chapter 13, or proposed to go into this chapter 13 of the 27 plumbing code, that will be defining the reuse scenario and the water quality level that will need to be attained when we're looking at reusing water for different applications. So those are some changes in that section that are proposed there. And I'm by no means showing you all of the proposed changes because, like I said, the plumbing code has 15 pages worth of proposed change. This is just kind of a snippet of what some of the changes are. So the last slide, I referred to some new tables that are proposed to go in. This is table 1301.2.1. just a portion of it, and I will show you a couple portions of it, but not the entire table. But so this is a new table, the required water quality for reuse applications. So on the left-hand side, you can see a use category. Here in particular, we have direct potable reuse and indirect potable reuse. So treatment follows the reuse application. And then we have some examples, direct potables, just direct potable reuse. And then within the indirect, we have aquifer recharge, either direct or surface application, aquifer storage and recovery, rapid infiltration, percolation basins, raw water, augmentation, saltwater intrusion barrier, surface water augmentation to a supply source. And then off the most important part of the chart, after we've defined the different scenarios that we might have here, they're proposing in this table that would go in an exposure level and a quality tier. So you can see the first one here is DC and the rest are IC, and then the quality tier is 4 for the first one and 2 down the rest of them. So looking at the bottom, kind of footnote here, the definitions of what those mean. The DC is in reference to a direct public contact or consumption is intended. So that's also considered a quality tier 4. All right, and you can see some other things are outlined here on this chart, in particular what we're showing for exposure. Here we have the IC, which is a quality tier 2, and that's indirect public consumption intended or possible. So it's kind of classifying, if you will, in these different applications and different usages, what we expect the exposure level might be, and ultimately what the quality tier is required. And we actually have a whole nother table that talks about the quality that we're going to look at in just a second here. This is another section, same table, just made it on 2 different slides here, so it wasn't minute and nobody could read it. But here are some other types of use: irrigation of food crops for human consumption. And the other category is irrigation of food crops not for human consumption. So on the for human consumption, we have food crops with processing that destroys the pathogens, orchards and vineyards. Obviously, that's going to be ultimately put into the product. Water contacts edible portion of a food crop. That would include root crops. And then the water doesn't contact the edible portion of a food crop. So over here, you see that there's on this table been put an exposure level and then a quality tier that would apply to those. And then some examples of, apologize, food crops, non-food, food crops not for human consumption. So here we have Christmas tree farms, hemp fiber, ornamental nursery, seed crops, tobacco, all kinds of things like that. And then it has an exposure level on there and a quality tier as to what's expected of each of those different kinds of things there. Another section of the same table, this talks about landscape irrigation, which would be a spray or drip. So you can see all kinds of different applications from athletic fields, cemeteries, campuses, golf courses, highway medians, pastures for either milk producing animals or non-milk producing animals, parks, playgrounds, residential irrigation, urban landscaping, schoolyards, all kinds of things. So all the different scenarios that you can think of they've tried to compile onto this table that they're hoping to add to the plumbing code in this chapter 13. Once again, you see the exposure and the quality tier shown off to the right-hand side here. And this is yet another section of this table talking about water features. So we've enumerated different types of applications you might have, whether it be fountains or ponds, lagoons, wetlands, all kinds of things that are put here. And then the exposure and quality level, all defined the same. And once again, I've shown you some sections of this table. It's quite a long table, and the whole table has not been shown here, just so that you don't have to look at all of it, but trying to give you a taste of things that are put on there and how they're classifying each type of use within that table. So I told you there was 3 tables being added. That we just looked at the first one. This 130122 is actually the second table that is proposed to be added, which is the water quality for tiers of reuse. So they have defined what a quality tier 4 means. It means US EPA primary and secondary drinking water quality standards apply. 18-15-15 log removal of enteric viruses, Giardia, and Cryptosporidium. So that defines that quality level. And then there's 3, which means it's compliant, of course, with all the applicable rules and ordinances, as well as with NSF 350. And then the other 2 or have some other less restrictive definitions there. All right, and then this is the third table that's being added as part of this, or suggested to be added as part of this proposal. And this is the log reduction, or the LRV credits that are applicable to DPR based on source water. So this talks about what kind of source water you have and defining it there. And then this tells you the maximum LRV credits for each of those. And a couple of these items have some footnotes associated with them. The A footnote, groundwater and surface waters must be either an untreated source of drinking water approved by the jurisdiction or a treated drinking water approved by the jurisdiction. And then over here on these LRV credits, for all source waters containing black water, they can't exceed a 2.0. So that's the third table that's proposed to be added. And all 3 tables are about the water quality and how the water is going to be, how it's going to be claimed and how it's going to be reused. All right. So this proposal also proposes to completely eliminate these 2 sections, 130121 and 22, on residential disinfectants and filtration required, because other language that's being put in is negating what's needed here, as well as the information that I've just shown you on those 3 tables. All right, 1302 previously was on-site non-potable water reuse systems, but now it's just going to be water reuse systems if this proposal goes through. So the general idea of this section is that it complies with ASTM E2635, and then you're going to look at section 1302 for this construction, installation, repair of these kinds of reuse systems. And 1302 talks about gray water sources, and it really already talked about gray water reuse systems, but it just didn't have that defined in the title of this section. So kind of just changing a little bit of terminology there. Made the list a little bit longer here in what types of things are included, and then taken out the last line of this where approved and as appropriate for the intended application, and just eliminated that language right there, or proposed to eliminate that language. Another part of this used to be this 130221 is now going to be 130223, but it used to just say prohibited sources, but now it specifically addresses this as black water sources, because that's what we were really talking about. And we don't have to use the term contains urine or fecal matter in this section anymore, because we've defined, as I showed you in the terminology section, what black water is going to mean. And you would go there and see that. You can see this whole laundry list of types of items that you might get discharge water out of. That list has been eliminated. Problems with lists are, once you make a list, you probably didn't get everything that should be on the list, so they've kind of simplified it there. So a lot of strike through in this section. And added here at the end to an approved on-site black water reuse system. Whole nother section here where we've basically taken a lot of the items that were in this section here and put them into 1302.4, talking about some other sources, condensate, reverse osmosis, water softener discharge water, wastewater discharge from wet hood scrubbers, also be considered for use in a water reuse system. So that's being added as additional language there, or proposed by this working group to add that. 13027 used to be titled filtration. Now it's being called treatment, to be a little more in line with what water reuse systems are doing. A lot of its language has been taken out here. But notice at the end, what has been added is treated to meet the quality standards required in tables 1301, 21, and 22, which are those tables that we went over with in some detail there at the beginning of this section, to give a little clearer definition for each type of use and how you're using it, how it will be reused. All right, 2 new sections here being added. 13028 is for treatment systems and how they'll be used, how they're installed, shut-off valves, that kind of thing. And then 1302.14.7 talks about the operational water quality testing and how you'll test the quality of that water in that section. This is all part of one proposal, the 15724 Part 1. So it's proposed for the IPC, should it be approved. And then there's one additional standard reference to the 40 CFR 141 for the US EPA primary and secondary drinking water standards. So that is being added as an additional standard to be referenced within the plumbing code. Proposed to being added. All right, this is all new language here. This is proposal, same proposal, but it's part 2 of the proposal. So this is the 28-page version that's going being proposed in the residential code. The plumbing section there. There's been a lot of language that's in the proposal that's being proposed to just be stricken, and then this whole new chapter 34 being created within the residential code, that is the water reuse systems. And so we can see here we have some general provisions. We have some reuse water quality showing there. These are some other sections that are proposed as part of this part 2 for gray water, black water reuse, non-potable rainwater collection, reclaimed water systems, and also the reference to the 40 CFR standard as well in the residential code. So if we had some ideas going forward, what might those be? So please chime in the chat if you have other ideas. I'm just going to throw some ideas out here. We don't have any mention in the codes of recirculating showers, but there are recirculating showers out there. Those use a pump, filter, sterilize the water, reuse the water. Some of us might have a hang up with using a recirculating shower, but they exist. They have different types of filtration, work different ways. But you know, perhaps going forward in the code, there might be some reference to something like that. These are probably a little more commonplace, the sink toilet combo. A lot of people, you know, don't like the idea of this because, hey, I don't want to use the toilet for a sink. But if you think about it, most of our toilets are receiving potable water into the tank. There's nothing contaminated in the tank of the toilet. That's perfectly potable water. So you could put a straw in there and drink out of it, if you would so choose. But, you know, perhaps the code needs to look at, you know, mandating something a little more like this. Recirculating washing machines. So some washing machines that we have already circulate water, and that's why they're called high efficiency washing machines, because they are using less water than a standard top loading washing machine that has an agitator in it. So, you know, we specify a lot of things. There was some mention of washing machines and how much cubic feet of water per size of the drum, but perhaps those could be addressed further in the codes, if that were an issue. All right. This is not so much a water reuse, but I would be remiss if I felt like if I didn't say something about this. We have a lot of undetected leaks in our plumbing system, whether it be a toilet that's running or, a slow leak in a faucet or something like that. And there are smart leak detection devices out there on the market. So maybe the codes could address something along those lines where that's something that's required. So in total, we need to, kind of in summary here, um, we need to mandate installation of water reuse fixtures. That might be showers, toilet, sink combos, high efficiency washing machines. Incorporate landscaping design that uses smart control system and use non-potable water as a reuse. Perhaps we need to better mandate rainwater harvesting systems as a requirement within the code. The question was in the chat about data centers. Those create a lot of HVAC and condensate there. So perhaps that needs to be addressed in the code when we're looking at HVAC systems. Idea to leak detection devices, not so much reuse, but like I said, it's a great. And then something else that ICC is working on is a standard for the water distribution pipe sizing in order to reduce the size of the pipes. There's an 815 standard that's being created right now. If anybody's interested, you're more than welcome to participate in that. But that hasn't been looked at for almost 80 or 90 years, and we certainly live in different environment where we have water efficient appliances and we have pipes that are supplying water that are way too large, and we're wasting water waiting for the hot water to get to our shower in the morning. So anyway, these are all the standards that these are all involved with. So this is an interesting thought here. Most of us wouldn't be willing to take a drink out of the toilet, as this young lady is doing here, but probably some hurdles we need to overcome are the perception of contamination, the trust in the treatment process, and of course there's psychological factors that go along with all this. But hopefully we can achieve this going forward by putting some new ideas into the code with some education on water treatment, those tables that I showed you, kind of addressing those kinds of things, basic language so everybody understands it, so we can get rid of this yuck factor, if you will, in the idea of reusing water. And then obviously, sharing some success stories when we hear about, an opportunity where something was done and it's like, wow, that's a great idea. So that is all I have. Anybody else? I see a few comments here. Laundromats to comply with car wash standards and filter the water. Great idea. Tank top toilet lavatory is common in Japan. Challenges would be a lack of hot water and accessibility. Agreed. Should mandate a recirculation system for hot water. Data centers, yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and that, whether that's driven by legislation or the code, probably could be driven by the code if we could get that put in there. Any other thoughts, comments, suggestions? All right, hearing none, seeing none at this time. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Hopefully this was a little, get us all think out of the box just a little bit. And I encourage you all to make some proposals to the next code cycle. As an ICC staff member, I'm not allowed to make changes, so I'm just throwing these ideas out for anybody else. It's a great opportunity to be part of the process. So thank you all for joining today, and I appreciate your time.